While global leaders meet at the UN, war and its threat hang over many of their nations. From Ukraine and Taiwan to the Mediterranean and the Caucasus, find out why they are fighting and what's at stake. Now, on The Inside Story, a world in conflict.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Pursuti, VOA senior Washington correspondent in New York City today, as the United Nations opens its annual General Assembly. Leaders from 193 member nations have arrived here to address the General Assembly about important issues facing their nations. It is the 77th time the General Assembly has met since the UN's birth after World War II. This year is like every prior year. War, conflict, and human suffering can be found all over the world. So we will go inside several of the world's conflicts to explain who's fighting, why they're fighting, and what's at stake. Let's start at the UN and VOA United Nations correspondent Margaret Bashir.
Queen Elizabeth's funeral on September 19th has presented logistical challenges for leaders attending the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Some speeches and meetings may have to be shuffled as they dash from London to New York. This year's meeting takes place at a time of great peril, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says.
Our world is blighted by war, battered by climate chaos, scared by hate, and shamed by poverty, hunger, and inequality.
Russia's war in Ukraine, which may be at a militarily decisive moment, is certain to dominate the annual meetings. The UN Security Council will meet at the foreign ministers level to discuss developments. The situation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is of particular concern.
We are playing with fire. We cannot continue in a situation when we are one step away from a nuclear accident. The safety of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is hanging by a thread.
Western officials, meanwhile, want to firm up support from some countries that may be wavering as the war grinds on.
Many African and Asian countries have security relationships with Russia or economic relationships with Russia. And while they were willing to criticize the invasion back in March, they don't want to keep on picking fights with Moscow at the UN.
But with Russian President Vladimir Putin not attending the annual gathering, he rarely does, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sending a video address, no breakthrough is expected.
But I have no illusions that at the present moment, the chances of a peace deal are minimal.
Russia and Ukraine are important food producers, and their war has worsened a global food crisis. Supply chain disruptions and rising food prices are exacerbating the situation in the Horn of Africa, which is suffering its worst drought in 40 years. As many as 20 million people are at risk of severe hunger, and famine is looming for nearly 8 million people in Somalia.
The famine is real, and it's happening.
President Joe Biden is expected to lead a high-level meeting on global food security, one of several sessions to tackle the issue. The Secretary General just returned from Pakistan, where deadly floods have submerged one-third of the country. He would like to see climate action high on leaders' agendas.
What is happening in Pakistan demonstrates the sheer inadequacy of the global response to the climate crisis and the betrayal and injustice at the heart of it.
This is the first time that leaders will participate fully in person at the General Assembly since 2020, the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has moved from the spotlight as leaders grapple with more pressing issues. Margaret Bashir, VOA News, the United Nations.
Among the world leaders who will not attend the UN General Assembly, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Putin is sending Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to speak on his behalf. Zelensky delivered a recorded address to the assembly. 141 of the 193 General Assembly nations voted for a resolution in March condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine and demanding it withdraw its forces. That war enters its 7th month this week. In that March resolution approved by the General Assembly is a paragraph confirming the involvement of Belarus in Russia's unlawful attack on Ukraine. Russian troops were allowed to perform military drills inside Belarus before the war started. And Belarus allowed Russia to stage attacks on Ukraine from Belarus. Its opposition leader is in New York for the General Assembly and told VOA in an exclusive interview that Belarus should not be seen as an, quote, appendix to Russia. More from VOA New York Bureau Chief Igor Tikhonenko.
Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is no stranger to the global political stage. But this is her first in-person visit to the United Nations General Assembly in New York.
I'm representing here the Belarusians who are fighting against dictator in our country.
Tikhanovskaya doesn't want the democratic world to think badly of her countrymen because of the actions of Belarus leader Alexander Lukashenko, an ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, after he allowed Russian forces to use Belarus territory to attack Ukraine. And experts believe she is succeeding at that.
Alexander Lukashenko has no right in representing the Belarusian society. The Belarusian society didn't vote for him in 2020. The society remains as victim and hostage of that regime, and she was able to articulate that.
With Russia suffering stunning losses in Ukraine's east, analysts believe her trip to the UNGA is timely.
I think the situation in Ukraine does not bode well for Alexander Lukashenko. I think he could be in big trouble because it means that Russia might not be able to maintain the support in propping him up.
Tikhanovskaya shares a similar viewpoint.
When Ukrainians win, it means that Putin is weak, hence Lukashenko is weak.
Tikhanovskaya had to leave Belarus with 2 young children in August of 2020, following a brutal post-election crackdown by the Lukashenko regime on peaceful protesters. Most Western observers consider her a legitimate winner of that year's presidential campaign, which she entered, replacing her husband, a popular blogger who was arrested and later jailed for 18 years by the authorities. Despite all that, she remains an advocate of a peaceful movement.
I still believe in peaceful decision of Belarusian crisis.
Experts say, however, the members of the protest movement in Belarus are disillusioned by the failures of peaceful demonstrations and demand more forceful actions from their leaders.
The vast majority of protesters today support the use of force to achieve change in the country.
But Tikhanovskaya says she wants to focus global leaders on Belarus in hopes of resolving the political crisis in her country in a non-violent manner. Igor Tikhonenko, VOA News, New York.
Elsewhere in the former Soviet Union, Azerbaijan and Armenia have renewed their long simmering conflict, prompting calls for restraint from both the U.S. and Russia. More than 150 have been killed in recent clashes along the border. Fresh wounds in the decades-long dispute over Nagorno-Karabakh, an ethnically Armenian region within Azerbaijan's territory. Here's VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain.
Relatives of Armenian servicemen wounded in night clashes with Azerbaijan gathered outside a military hospital in Yerevan. Yerevan says 105 of its troops have been killed. Baku says about 49 of its troops have been killed. At the State Department, spokesperson Ned Price said the U.S. is particularly concerned by reports of civilians hurt inside Armenia, and that Secretary of State Antony Blinken has spoken to Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev.
He urged President Aliyev to cease hostilities immediately, to disengage military forces, to pull forces back from the border, and to cease hostilities that could endanger civilians, and to work to resolve all outstanding issues between Armenia and Azerbaijan through peaceful negotiations.
Armenian residents of the village of Sotka near the border with Azerbaijan told reporters homes were hit by Azeri shelling and burned down. On Tuesday, Blinken said he had spoken to the leaders of both countries.
Spoke to both, urged them to do everything possible to pull back from any conflict and to get back to talking about building a lasting peace between their countries.
The Armenian Ministry of Defense released a video Tuesday that it says shows Azerbaijani forces advancing on its territory. One expert told VOA he is surprised at this surge in hostilities in light of all the negotiations that had been going on.
And now suddenly we're in the middle of what I consider to be a major step backward in that process.
Russia operates a military base in Armenia and in the past has been seen as an ally of Yerevan and a key power broker in the region. But experts say with Russia immersed in its invasion of Ukraine, it is uncertain what role Moscow will play in this conflict. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Go west from Armenia and you reach Turkey. On Turkey's western frontier across the Aegean Sea is Greece. Tensions are escalating over Greece and its effort to militarize the islands located between the two NATO allies. Our Dorian Jones explains from Istanbul.
Touring the country, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is banging the nationalist drum, warning Turkey may occupy Greek islands, which he claims Greece has militarized in violation of an international agreement.
Greece has to stop its adventurous stance, which is not in accordance with its NATO membership, and should give up its non-diplomatic discourse, because this is creating a big worry in Turkish society and raising the question, is Greece at war with Turkey? Moreover, this is bringing out ultranationalist sentiments in Turkey.
Athens insists the militarization of its islands is in response to Turkish military threats. With Greece engaged in a significant rearmament program, buying weapons from the United States and France, along with military cooperation agreements, Athens says it's ready to stand up to its powerful neighbor.
Two major agreements, one with the United States and the other one with France, of course, enhanced tremendously both the capabilities and the morale of the Greek armed forces. So, they remain very confident.
Domestic politics could be exacerbating the current Turkish-Greek tensions, with both leaders facing re-election next year. Turkey and Greece are no strangers to tensions. In 1996, the two countries went to the verge of war over a small uninhabited island. Washington's intervention averted that crisis. But analysts warn such mediation efforts are absent given Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Erdogan's strained relations with his Western allies.
Already both EU and Washington have huge challenges in how they're dealing with Ankara and Erdogan. So they don't want one more problem on their plate.
This month, Turkey and Greece blamed each other for the recent drowning of refugees in the Aegean Sea. With neither leader appearing ready to back down and the absence of mediation, the fear is these latest deaths in the Aegean may not be the last. Dorian Jones for VOA News, Istanbul.
Iran's president is attending the General Assembly for the first time. He says there will be no reviving the 2015 Iran nuclear deal unless the U.S. guarantees it will not withdraw from the agreement again. But his presence in New York has many talking about the possibilities. We go back to VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain.
In an interview with VOA at the White House, National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby said the U.S. and Iran are now farther away from an agreement. But he still believes it is better for the Iran nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, to be revived.
The United States is still committed to getting back into the JCPOA, getting it back implemented, because again, we believe the deal was working before the previous administration pulled out. Iran is closer now to breakout capability now, today, as you and I sit here, than they were anywhere near when the deal was put in place back in 2015.
On Capitol Hill, Republican lawmakers oppose efforts by the Biden administration to get the deal implemented again. Representative Tim Burchett told VOA he believes Iran is not going to deal in good faith.
They're making some pretty unreasonable, unrealistic demands. They want the full economic benefits, the 2015 deal, and they want to end the United Nations probe into some of that undeclared nuclear material in Iran.
If the Iran nuclear deal is revived, the ranking Republican member of the House Foreign Service Committee, Michael McCall, told VOA he is worried about what Tehran would do if sanctions were eased.
What I worry about is if we are going to lift these sanctions and you have billions of dollars going into Iran, we're going to have the same experience we had last time, and that is funding terror operations in Syria and Iraq, in Lebanon and with Hamas, and also in Yemen with the Houthi rebels.
At UNGA, France's Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna called on Iran to accept the proposal on the table to revive a nuclear deal, warning that it will not get a better offer. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Elsewhere in the Middle East, Israel is bringing thousands of Jews out of Ethiopia to reunite with family members already living in Israel. The airlift comes as war escalates in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Details from Linda Gradstein in Tel Aviv.
Last year, the Israeli government promised to reunite families and rescue Ethiopian Jews from Ethiopia's war. But the escalating war is just one reason for this mission, according to some Israeli analysts.
I think it has to do, as so many things do, with internal Israeli politics and those in the coming election. I think that's much more relevant than anything that's happened in Ethiopia recently.
Ethiopia's war is centered in the northern Tigray region. Most of the Ethiopian Jews are from Gondar in the nearby region of Amhara. Officials say they are not directly threatened by the war, but it does have an indirect effect.
We see the cost of living increasing because of the war and the financial problem that the Olim are facing in Gondar and in Ethiopia, and we are more and more challenged with that cases.
But some Ethiopian Israeli activists say that Israel has an obligation to rescue thousands of Jews remaining in the Tigray war zone, even if they are not on the list of those recognized for family reunification.
Look at Ukraine. The state of Israel has rescued not only Jews from the war there, but refugees too. I support that as a moral person. But why aren't they bringing the Jews from Tigray to Israel?
Israeli officials say they see their mission as helping any Jew in distress, and they will continue these flights from Ethiopia for the next few months. Linda Gradstein for VOA News, Tel Aviv.
When asked if the U.S. troops would defend Taiwan if it's invaded by China, President Biden told CBS News yes. The candid assessment is the latest flashpoint in the growing tension between the U.S. and China over Taiwan. Recently, a bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers met with Taiwan's president to reaffirm economic and security assistance to the island republic, which China claims as its territory. VOA's congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson spoke with members of the delegation.
Renewed support for Taiwan as yet another bipartisan congressional delegation calls for deeper ties in the face of threats from China.
Our delegation, as with every congressional delegation that has visited, is a symbol of Congress's rock-solid commitment to Taiwan.
This latest visit follows Nancy Pelosi's historic trip last month, the first by a U.S. Speaker of the House in 25 years. A member of the latest delegation told VOA it is time for a change in the U.S. approach.
Our policy has always been strategic ambiguity instead of strategic clarity, but that was
many, many years ago, 40 years ago almost. And what we need to look at is China has changed dramatically in that period of time. They were not nearly the significant military or economic power that they are today.
The Biden administration approved $1.1 billion in arms sales to Taiwan last week, a move that drew swift condemnation from China.
The U.S. arms sale to Taiwan blatantly violates the One China principle.
But there is bipartisan support in the U.S. Congress for even more support of Taiwan, including closer ties in agriculture and trade.
We'd like to see them trading more with us and sort of balance the trade.
A U.S. House panel heard testimony Wednesday that a new U.S.-Taiwan free trade agreement and bringing Taiwan into the Trans-Pacific Partnership would play a crucial role in countering authoritarianism.
Taiwan is at the front line of this rivalry as Beijing intensifies political, military, and economic coercion against it as part of a broader strategy to subvert the island's democracy and compel reunification. The United States should aid Taiwan's efforts to defend its people, its democracy, and its freedoms. A U.S.-Taiwan BTA would serve that goal.
A key U.S. Senate committee also approved the Taiwan Security Act this week. If passed, it would provide $6.5 billion in security funding over the next 5 years. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
The schedule for the UN General Assembly had to be shuffled to accommodate the number of world leaders attending the funeral for Britain's Queen Elizabeth II. While many lauded the Queen's 70-year reign, not everyone sees it the same way, especially in Kenya, which gained its independence from Britain in 1963. Juma Majanga explains from Nairobi.
She became a queen while on a visit to Kenya and went on to be the last colonial monarch for Africa. Her accession to the throne came as African colonies clamored for independence. Queen Elizabeth II had to supervise the elimination of the British colonial empire.
She was able to adjust to the reality of the imperial decline and then transform that imperial decline as if to a good thing, something common that people can be part of and wanted to be part of. That is the Commonwealth.
To some Africans, the British colonial rule is synonymous with exploitation. They blame the Queen, the representative of the British interests, for the atrocities during that period.
I personally will not forget that I was incarcerated for 7 years. I cannot forget I was put together with my father. I cannot forget I left my children for 7 years without food, without education. That I will never forget.
But with territorial colonialism now decades gone, memories of the wrongs of British rule in Africa are fading.
She was many things to many people. To the colonial subjects, at the time of colonialism, she was a symbol of the evil that was colonialism. With independence, she was able to transform herself to a likable person. And as a person, she was likable.
Queen Elizabeth was widely admired and seen as a role model by many on the continent.
The legacy she's left will really keep her name deeply rooted in the hearts of generations to come.
For me, it's just sad. I can't really say I take it personally, but I mean, it's sad for people around the world and especially for England.
Never known any other ruler last that long. So for this now to have happened, well, it only means that every man has an end.
Analysts say Queen Elizabeth's biggest legacy is the creation of the Commonwealth. And with the death of the Queen, the future of that legacy now lies with the new king, King Charles III. Juma Majanga for VOA News, Nairobi.
That's all for now. Keep up with the UN General Assembly at voanews.com. Follow VOA News on Instagram and Facebook, and follow me on Twitter at CarolynVOA. And watch previous episodes on our free streaming service, VOA Plus. For all those behind the scenes who brought you today's episode, I'm Carolyn Pursuti. See you next week for the Inside Story.